Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Huang. I am so inspired to be a member of such a vibrant intellectual community. I'm sure some of you know that Dr. Huang just won a patent for one of her inventions, and this is on top of National Science Foundation grants and other distinguished achievements. So it's great to be teaching with such exciting colleagues where so much is going on. I am going to talk today about some research that I did during the past academic year. Probably some of you students are just now learning that your teachers are hired not just to teach you, but to add to the wealth of human knowledge, as several of my colleagues have continued to do. So last year, Penn State was paying me to study old books. And as I read, I was really struck by how relevant some of the topics that I was reading about are to us today. So my topic is what the world needs then and now. New diseases, strange weather, abroad, shifting alliances, dwindling possessions, and terrifying new enemies. At home, a dangerously fragmented population, some embracing new ideas spread via cutting-edge technology, others suspicious and alienated. The economy is destabilized by government intrusions. Support for primary as well as secondary and higher education falls. Previously straightforward markets are newly monetized, widening the gap between rich and poor. A constitutional transition of power devolves into a tug of war, while the elite fight to protect their power. A populist demagogue cultivates his influence by signaling to the angry and dispossessed that their grievances will finally be heard. And true believers are certain that an ancient book offers simple answers to entrenched societal problems. The 21st century, the current election? No, the late 1540s and early 1550s in England. The years after Henry VIII died, leaving his 9-year-old son Edward on the throne. We have the Zika virus. They had sweating sickness, which killed thousands, usually within a few hours of the first symptoms. Nowadays, we think it may have been a hantavirus or pulmonary anthrax. We have climate change. They had a run of cooler than average temperatures and heavy rains leading to disastrous harvests and high mortality. We have a breakdown in relations with a newly resurgent Russia, unexpected volatility in the Philippines, and North Korea with an unpredictable leader and growing nuclear confidence, and ISIS. Mid-16th century England had costly military campaigns with their nearest neighbors, France and Scotland, losing territory and influence. The religious character of America is changing. Percentages of Christians, whether evangelical, mainline Protestant, or Catholic, are falling, while growing numbers are practicing non-Christian faiths or are unaffiliated with any religion. But this change in our country is gradual, indeed small and slow, compared with the change in England's religious character during the 1530s, 40s, and 50s. England went from being a religiously unified country recognizing the jurisdiction of the Pope to being a self-declared empire with its own state church and its own king as the supreme head. In a stroke, Henry VIII claimed the leadership and demanded the loyalty of all church personnel, bishops and other administrators, the priests of some 9,000 parishes, and around 12,000 monks, friars, and nuns in almost 900 convents and monasteries. If the clergy wanted to keep their positions, they had to swear allegiance to their new chain of command. We have a fragmented population with publications, channels, blogs, and Twitter tags to appeal to every ideological stripe, from liberals to conservatives, from gender pioneers to jihadis to GMO activists, and endless variations on all of the above. In the Abaddon-Wiener household, sexually charged exchanges and State Department emails jostle for space on the same electronic device. In 16th century England, the cutting-edge technology was the printed book, and new ideas spread to the newly literate. In mid-century England, people were at least as likely to rally and riot in support of their positions as Americans are today. Some of us are alarmed at the prospect of a President Trump. Others at the prospect of an ongoing Clinton dynasty. But few of us are nostalgic for a political system in which a constitutionally designated officer like the arrogant and overbearing populist Edward Seymour, the king's uncle, might be executed as a felon by his fellow counselors. Traditional church teaching assumed that prayers and masses benefited Christians on their way to heaven. Monasteries, convents, and other institutions were founded to support those who dedicated themselves to prayer on behalf of others. During their time not spent in prayer, priests and monks provided services to the community. They ran primary schools, offered hospitality to travelers and the infirm, and fed the poor. Late in Henry VIII's reign, the king exerted his power as the church's supreme head to seize church wealth in the form of monasteries and their land holdings, about a quarter of the real estate in England. I'm talking value in rents, not acreage per se. Private endowments called chantries, supported priests who celebrated Mass for souls in purgatory. The Masses were chanted, hence chantries. Edward's council completed the job of appropriating church wealth by abolishing the chantries. Nuns and monks were pensioned off, while priests were assigned to work in parishes. This provision meant that no separate pension would be required to support ordained priests, just the regular stipend allowed to a clergyman in that particular parish. The king's supreme headship in England provided the legal justification for this massive redistribution of resources. So you could talk about nationalizing the infrastructure, 25% of the value of the real estate economy. The traditional teaching about purgatory, the prayers for the dead would shorten and ease their time of purification for heaven, had been modified by official statements that it is not in the power or knowledge of any man to limit and dispense how much, in what space of time, or to what particular person the masses do profit and avail, and that the place where the souls remain before they go to heaven, the name thereof, and the state and condition they be in, is to us uncertain. So these doubts raised about purgatory provide an ideological rationale for shutting down the monasteries and the chantries and repurposing their revenue. The laws that closed these institutions stipulated that their wealth would support education and other social goods, but only a fraction was used to establish schools or charitable institutions. More funded Henry's failed effort to reestablish Plantagenet rule on the continent in France. In both Henry's and Edward's reigns, most church wealth flowed through the court of augmentations into private purses. They had to set up a new institution to handle this tremendous influx of revenue. I'm sure our government would love to have a similar problem. Agricultural lands and their tenants' rents enriched new landlords. Imagine a fictional Tudor ancestor for the fictional Robert Crawley. Monastery buildings, like the fictional Downton's original abbey, were available for purchase by groups or individuals who often dismantled or even burned the largest structures to recover the leads in the roofs and the building stone. When England's long-established religious institutions changed hands in the 16th century, the powerful became richer, while social services in rural areas dried up. King Edward's preachers held land-hungry aristocrats responsible. And here I have a quote, where 50 ton-bellied monks, a ton is a large cask for wine or ale, where 50 ton-bellied monks given to gluttony filled their paunches, kept up their house, and relieved the poor around them, there one of your greedy guts, devouring the whole house, burning it up for the lead roof or the building stone, and making great pillage throughout the country, cannot be satisfied. Universities suffered as well. Most students and professors had been supported by monastic endowments. Most went home when the money quit flowing. The remaining few reportedly subsisted on salt beef and porridge, being without fire, run up and down for half an hour to get warm before they go to bed. The now dissolved monasteries and chantries had also provided primary education to rural children. Many grammar schools and much charitable provision for the poor be taken, sold, and made away, to the great slander of you, King Edward, and your laws, to the utter discomfort of the poor, to the grievous offense of the people, to the most miserable drowning of youth in ignorance and sore decay of the universities. Without replacement arrangements being made, warned a different court preacher, such schools' disappearance will bring the realm into a very barbarousness. Civilization as we know it will end. In the absence of ton-bellied monks, different beasts are starved in 21st century America. Private contractors assure small municipalities that certain government functions can be made to pay for themselves. Healthcare chains buy up small hospitals and nursing homes. For-profit educational chains recruit public school children as well as adults seeking academic degrees and vocational training. Fines for traffic and parking violations, Medicaid, Medicare, and private insurance payments, local property tax revenue, and federally guaranteed student loan dollars now flow, in part, to private corporations. The private prison industry and the purchase by private companies of databases and content management systems originally developed in universities is another manifestation of the same cultural and economic shift. So I read a lot of the sermons that I looked at on texts that were originally digitized by the University of Michigan at the expense of the state of Michigan. And this database that the University of Michigan, probably graduate students and other staff members, kind of digitized through decades of work, was purchased, a nice influx of money to the University of Michigan, by ProQuest, which our library now contracts with to subscribe to the database, which is great, except that it places our university at the mercy of a private corporation who could decide that they needed more rent from our university and all the others to subscribe to it on my behalf. Whereas the University of Michigan regarded Penn State University as a peer and was not trying to make money off of us. So you see how this works, or at least one way of looking at how it works. Now, as then, we might agree that ton-bellied bureaucrats, administrators, and faculty members may be gluttonous, lazy, and ideologically suspect, just like those monks. We can nevertheless recognize that at least some of the citizens, prisoners, patients, and students are better served by inefficient systems than when corporations profit from the work of teachers, nurses, doctors, security, and clerical personnel. In Edward's reign, the dissolution of monasteries and chantries was not the only economic change. A lucrative market in wool exports motivated landowners to diversify into sheep farming. To graze the sheep, they fenced off portions of their land previously shared among their tenants as common pasture land. Enclosure, as it was called, forced a landowner's tenants to repurpose cropland or feed grain to livestock who had previously grazed for free. New leasemongers, think rental agents, intruded between the lord of the manor and his tenants, raising rents. In another strategy also used in gentrifying urban areas today, landlords discontinued maintenance on their rental properties to get rid of tenants who paid low rent so as to turn the land to more profitable account. Here's another quote. It is a common custom with covetous landlords to let their housing so decay that the farmer shall be glad for a small reward or none at all to give up his lease, that they, taking the grounds into their own hands, may turn all to pasture for their new investment in the wool trade. So now old fathers, poor widows, and young children lie begging in the miry streets. Meanwhile, speculators, wholesalers, regraders of corn, victuals, and all manner of wares inserted themselves into the supply chain between the farmer and the merchant, reducing payments to growers while raising market prices, making dearth and scarcity for working people. One preacher, the 62-year-old Hugh Latimer, outlined the real-life consequences of agricultural depression to a congregation that included the now 11-year-old king and the wealthy aristocrats on his council. So imagine a public cabinet meeting doubling as a revival service. My father was a yeoman and had no lands of his own. Only he had a farm of 3 or 4 pounds by the year at the utmost. So this would be about $15,000 or $20,000 a year that this tenant farmer paid in rent. So something around $1,300 a month to rent the farm. The preacher recalled, on that farm, he tilled so much as supported 6 farm hands and their families. He had walk for 100 sheep, and my mother milked 30 cows. Hardworking farm life. As a boy, Latimer helped his father buckle on his armor before the older man rode his own horse and provided his own equipment to the muster as a volunteer against the rebels in 1497. Presumably when he got to the armory, he was provided with provisions and whatever he needed to keep from being hungry while he fought. He kept me to school, first at the local grammar school and then at Cambridge University, where Latimer won a monastic-sponsored fellowship. Else I would not have been able to preach before the King's Majesty now. The older Latimer helped his 6 daughters get their start in adult life by providing marriage portions of 5 pounds or 20 nobles apiece. This would be about $25,000, so a nice little help toward the down payment on the first house or business startup costs for the daughter, since she doesn't go to school, so that he brought them up in the fear of God. He kept hospitality for his poor neighbors, and some alms he gave to the poor, and all this did he of that said farm. In the good old days, at the turn of the 16th century, a tenant farmer could make a decent living, provide for his family, and contribute to the good of his community and the nation. Wouldn't your parents feel good if they had $25,000 in the college fund before you emerged into adulthood? By contrast, says Latimer, the same farm's current tenant pays £16 by the year or more, that is upwards of $80,000 a year to rent the farm, and is not able to do anything for his prince, for himself, nor for his children, or give a cup of drink to the poor. Thus all the enhancing and rearing, the raising of agricultural rents, goeth to your private commodity and wealth, that is, into the pockets of the wealthy aristocrats. Today we could speak of wages stagnating or even falling, as wages must, if profits for corporate shareholders are to show a healthy return on investment, while living expenses rise. With our national minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, many of today's unskilled wage earners work 2 or 3 low-paying jobs to stave off eviction and foreclosure, or foreclosure, not both, leaving them with too little time or energy to bond with and guide their children, who then, one imagines, get into fights with their classmates at William Allen or Deerfield High School that we hear about on the news. We hear warnings that the daughters of the poor will become single mothers. Sons will run afoul of the law rather than going to college. Latimer made the same dark prediction to his country's leaders 468 years ago. For if ye bring it to pass that the yeomanry be not able to put their sons to school, and that they be not able to marry their daughters to the avoiding of whoredom, I say, you utterly destroy the realm. Disruption of long-established systems to educate the young and deliver social services. New ways to monetize other people's work. High prices, low wages, shuttered schools, families turned off their lands. Beggars accosting solid citizens on the streets. Court preachers like Thomas Lever, Hugh Latimer, and Bernard Gilpin assigned the blame to covetousness, the sin of desiring for oneself what belongs to someone else and what God has seen fit to withhold from you. Covetousness was forbidden by the Ten Commandments and identified as the root of all evil in the New Testament. This sin explained everyone's bad behavior, from the carnal gospelers who embraced the new religion to enrich themselves through confiscated monastic property, to the leasemongers, those rental agents and regraders, to the small farmers who violated public order by tearing down their landlord's new fences, which enclosed the pastures where their cattle used to graze. Thomas Lever develops his accusation of covetousness into a parable. Hark a little, and I shall tell you of an abominable robbery done in the city, known to the officers of the city and as yet unpunished, but rather maintained in the city. There is a great sum of money sent from an honorable lord by his servant unto those he is indebted unto in the city. The officers, knowing that they to whom this money is sent have great need of it, know also in what places, at what times, these unthrifty servants by whom it is sent at gaming, banqueting, and riot do spend it. If this be an evil deed, why is it not punished? Because it is not known, some say. But do not many of you know? Sure I am that all of you that be officers ought to know that riches and treasure, which rich men and rufflers waste at greedy gaming, gluttonous banqueting, and such riot, is not their own, but sent them from the honorable Lord of heaven unto others that be honest, poor, and needy, unto whom God by his promise is indebted. Hear, ye servants of the Lord, which have received the treasures of the Lord, unto whom the Lord by you hath sent them, unto the hungry, the needy, the naked, and those be of the same flesh and blood that you yourselves are. Imagine the drivers of a private security firm stopping at the Sands Casino as if the cash they transported were their own. The wealthy who spend on their own lifestyle above and beyond what is proper are covetous, spending on themselves money that God explicitly promises to the poor. And what, according to the preachers, was the opposite of covetousness, the cure for the social damage that it wreaked? Covetousness has banished from amongst us Christian charity, lamented Bernard Gilpin early in 1553. King Edward, by now 15 and perhaps sick with his final illness, missed this sermon preached at Whitehall Palace. Gilpin had to preach it to his seat rather than to him himself. Charity is familiar to us, especially as we itemize our deductions before filing our tax returns. But Gilpin meant more than giving to organizations that help the poor. We have forgotten Christ's last words, which he so often before his final passion did inculcate: love. Love, love, love one another. Covetousness. Love. An old-fashioned diagnosis and an old-fashioned cure for strangely up-to-date social ills. Might not these ideas usefully inform our attitudes today? Although I very seldom miss church, I cannot recall ever hearing a sermon denouncing covetousness, and only a few exalting love. Love for the people we interact with, live among in the Lehigh Valley, or hear about on the news. Love as a motive for socially productive activity. In 2016, professors of marketing and communication design teach future advertisers how to create consumer desire. Initiatives like Invent Penn State and Launchbox bring cities like Allentown and universities like ours together to support entrepreneurs who develop new goods and services. Covetousness, or something closely resembling it, is an important engine of our mostly capitalist and consumer-driven economy. How might love, or something closely resembling it, extend the benefits of that economy to more of our fellow citizens while shielding the vulnerable from some of its cruelest excesses? Thank you very much.